Hello there, information architecture students. This is Professor Keith Schengili-Roberts, and here we are again, this time for week number 8. Of course, the first pre-recorded part that you're of course watching right now, and of course this is designed for information architecture students at the University of Toronto's information faculty for the course INF 2170. And this week we're going to have a look at, as it says here, information architecture, essentially the third major part: Thesauri, controlled vocabularies, and metadata. So first thing we're going to have a look at is essentially controlled vocabularies, metadata, and thesauri. Basically looking at why, and this is the way I like to put it, why soda equals soft drink equals tingle fizz fuzz. Okay, so in terms of, talking about controlled vocabularies and what they are, basically, as I say here, it's data providing information about one or more aspects of the data. And this particular image is actually pulled from the Polar Bear book, and essentially it runs along a spectrum of particular values, ranging from the simple, and you can see that there are things, and these are various types of ways of organizing information. So you can have synonym rings, you can have authority files that sort of step up from that, then full classification schemes, and then full-on thesauri that sort of provide essentially more in-depth coverage of the sort of the understanding and the relatedness of things. Same with as essentially the relationships underneath, where it says equivalence, then hierarchical, and then associative. So essentially, the first level is essentially saying that this thing is equivalent to this other thing, and then in a hierarchy, it might be that, okay, here are a bunch of things, and here is a relationship between those in a hierarchical relationship, and then an associated one is one where there may or may not be hierarchy, but essentially there are links throughout the complex interaction of items and bits of content and metadata and so forth, and how they then connect with each other. So, as I say here, it's a standardized set of terms and phrases authorized for use in an indexing system to describe a subject matter or information domain, or a collection of preferred or non-preferred terms that are used to assist in a more precise retrieval of content. One of the quotes I like to mention in terms of controlled vocabularies is like they are basically predetermined vocabularies of preferred terms that describe a specific domain, such as for everything from auto racing to orthopedic surgery. And they typically include variant terms. So, for example, brewski is often a variant name for beer, which I'm hoping a lot of the students, in this course would understand that one, when somebody says brewski, they mean beer, and vice versa. So some of the purposes of having a controlled vocabulary, I list 5 of them here. So one of them is for translation purposes. Now, not all websites necessarily translate their content, but for those who do, it is actually quite important for them to have a full understanding of how they describe particular terms, particularly in the way that they describe, say, product information. So in this case, it provides a means for converting the natural language of the people who are creating the website, as well as those who are using it, into a vocabulary that can then be used for indexing and retrieval. And then also for consistency, again, to promote uniformity in terms of term format and in the assignment of those terms. So essentially, when we say, here is this particular product name and here's how it's described, you don't want to have wholly different ways of describing essentially the same thing, because, well, that will essentially confuse people. And then you also want to indicate relationships. So this is a way to indicate semantic relationships among terms. So essentially saying that, this is potentially related to this other thing. So that when somebody says, I'm looking for X, and you don't actually have a representation of that term for X, but you actually know that whenever somebody says brewski, you then take them to the webpage that then says beer. So that's an indication of relationships, one term essentially being equivalent to another. And then we have, also to label and browse, so to provide consistent and clear hierarchies in a navigation system to help users locate the desired content object. So again, this really in some ways speaks, again, back to the idea of point number 2, consistency. You want to be consistent in the way that you are describing and naming things, and then doing so not just within the content, but also within the navigation systems and the labeling. And then also in terms of retrieval, to use as a searching aid in locating content objects. So again, what I came up with before, the example of brewski to beer, again, that's kind of that's a synonymous term example. So that if somebody's then searching for something within a search engine, you might want to have a bunch of synonymous terms which then point to perhaps a single term, which then encapsulates your description of a particular a piece of content or something that or a product, for example. And in case you're wondering, and what I do have here is there are in fact guidelines doing this. So there is in fact an ANSI guideline, as you can see here, guidelines for the construction, format, and management of monolingual controlled vocabulary. So these things do exist, and for those who do get deep into information architecture, doing that from a business perspective, this is one of the things that you might have to sort of delve into to get if you're looking at fully constructing a controlled vocabulary within an organization. Having said that, generally speaking, there's often already pre-existing vocabularies within a system, and this may simply be a way of formalizing it, put it that way. Quite a lot of companies that have a lot of fairly ad hoc ways of doing this. This is simply one particular guideline designed to help professionals in the area, and of course there are certainly a number of tools that also aid in this particular area. But again, one thing I really want to emphasize here is that essentially all of this really comes down to metadata. So what I have here, this is actually on the U of T grounds. It's kind of tucked away, and I took this picture, as you can see, quite a number of years ago, and I shot this with my digital camera. This is a picture of the Fenian Monument on the University of Toronto grounds. And you can see the picture, but along with this picture and each and every other picture on that camera and any other digital camera that is out there, it comes with an associated a bunch of metadata. So in this case, this is not even the whole of the metadata that was associated with this image. I believe it's about half of what came with this original image. And I haven't actually looked to see what the more recent cameras and so forth would do, but I'm certain that it in fact has more metadata these days. But so essentially, whenever you're taking an image or a picture of something, you're going to be having a lot of metadata that comes with it. And this is essentially saying that you may not even realize just how much metadata is already associated with the digital content that you are creating. And again, I'm not going to go through everything here, but it is interesting to see the depth of the information here. So it does say, like who made the camera, the type of model, information on the exposure time that was taken, the f number or the f-stop number, the date and time that it was created, the lens focal length, orientation, the DPI, the horizontal and vertical resolution, software that was then used to help manipulate it, and so on and so forth. And again, like I say, this is roughly, as I remember, about half or so of the information that was actually embedded, as part of the image. And again, this is not something that you would, not necessarily be aware of, but this is exactly the sort of thing that is created by any sort of digital imaging hardware / software that you might be using. So at this point, you might be asking yourself, well, what the heck is metadata? And basically, this is one way of putting it. It is essentially data about data. And basically, it may incorporate any or all of the following. The means of creation of the data, so how it should be, how it should be described and what are the potential values for it, the purpose of the data, why this metadata even exists, in other words, the time and date of its creation, information about the creator or author of this metadata, the location on a computer network, perhaps, where it was created, any standards that may be associated with this metadata, and of course things like, say, file size. So what? And the reason I have these pictures of Cunard line essentially luggage tickets. It's essentially, it's like if you think of metadata in terms of luggage, its contents essentially are the data, and the metadata is the tag that is then attached to it. So it describes, where it came from. It might even say a little bit, well, it might say exactly, as you see here, the name of the luggage, the ship that it is on, the sailing date from, and where it's coming from, where it's going to, the class that is provided here, and then as you can see, the American address and the European address, all of which are important if you, in fact, you have a lost piece of luggage in this case, and this will hopefully help people, help find where this luggage is in fact supposed to go. So in this case, and now it doesn't describe the contents of what's inside the luggage, and that can of course always change. But in this case, the idea is that is essentially the tag is an identifier, and it does provide some description as to who the contents of the luggage belong to. So some sample metadata characteristics which are common, the metadata itself, in other words, the name of the metadata, its value, so all possible values for that metadata field, so to speak, the default value, if there is one, to specify a fallback value if there's nothing else specified, as to whether or not there are single or multiple values, so said whether one or more values are actually allowed, and then the definition, the ruling characteristics of the metadata, and then any sort of notes, so other relevant information to aid with the classification. So in terms of the work that I typically do these days as a consultant, I work on a particular XML standard called DITA, which is short for Darwin Information Typing Architecture, and I'm helping with aspects of the next version of the standard, which is going to be 2.0, and I'm helping to come up with things of definitions like this for new elements and attributes that we're introducing into the next version of the standard. So, one recent thing that got passed and will now definitely be part of the standard, essentially, all of these things and more were described because people have to understand how to use the XML elements, what are the scenarios in which they're used and so forth, and that a lot of that is actually going beyond metadata per se, but there is in fact a lot of metadata descriptions that go into devising the individual elements for this particular standard. Now, having said that, another thing you might want to be, if you're interested again in some of the more technical aspects of information architecture on the web, something that I'd recommend taking a look at is what's known as schema.org. This is been put together by a consortium of search engines, so that includes the likes of Google, Yahoo, I believe Bing, Yandex, which is one of the major Russian search engines, and I think one or two others. And essentially this is this particular schema, so to speak, schema.org, is essentially a way to try to describe the content of individual websites and also web pages. So and this is again very much an ever-evolving sort of thing. And on the left is of this, you can see on this particular slide, is a left of schema values, and on the right is an extract of some of the specific values relating to creative work. So what is it? Well, this is a thing, and then from thing is then derived to creative work. The most generic kind of creative work, including books, movies, photographs, software programs, etc. And at this point, when I took this particular screen capture, it was being used on somewhere between 250,000 and a 500,000 domains. I'm sure it's considerably more than that now. And again, what's going on here? This is essentially a set of metadata. So you have an about, The expected type is then thing. Access mode, and then again, that's another, that's also text. Actually, in some ways, this is kind of the opposite way. So these are essentially naming the individual properties, and then coming up with descriptions saying what each of these things are. So taking a look at, for example, at access mode sufficient, a list of single or combined access modes that are sufficient to understand all the intellectual content of a resource. Expected values include auditory, tactile, textual, and visual. So those are the values in which case that can actually be ascribed to that particular one. And as you can see, we're only just beginning at the A's here. So this is a fairly extensive and ever-evolving way of describing content on the web. So, and this is something that's particularly important if you're interested, for example, in search engine optimization. So, as I mentioned before, this has been sponsored by the major search engines, and their purpose is to create and support a common set of schemas for structured data markup on web pages. Its vocabulary is designed for marking up content with semantic descriptions aimed at web spiders that are, being provided by the search engine firms. And the nice thing about this is that you can actually format this in one of several different ways. So you can use either microdata, RDFA, or JSON-LD format. So, and in terms of how this is then, how an example part of this code might actually look. And this would be essentially in the header of a web page. So this is not something that is visible to the user. You'd actually have to go into view code to see what this looks like. And this is in RDFA. This is one particular format. And you can see here we have schema.org is being referenced, and then what is this? What is the thing being referenced? It's a movie in this case, and then we have the name avatar, and then in this case information on the director, and information again on the who is the director. Actually, I should say, sorry, I'm wrong. In this case, this is information which is embedded in the body content of the code, and I think that is specific to this particular format. I think my understanding is that within JSON-LD, it's sort of a mix of material that is in the header and in the body. I confess I don't know for certain if that's the case, but in any event, you can see here that this is trying to describe the material so that if someone is then looking for information on a particular science fiction genre movie, as you can see here from span property equals genre, they might then run across this particular movie. So now we want to look at why categorization matters in a controlled vocabulary. And you get a sense of this from this particular illustration. So, we have two people who are actually looking at the exact same set of things. So we have, basically a bunch of shapes that are colored in particular ways. And one person looks at this and goes, shapes. And the other person looks at this and goes, all the different colors. And that's how they categorize things. So basically, keep in mind that people can think of the same thing in different ways, and we've already seen, quite a bit of evidence for that. So now this next part is something I usually like to do in a live class, and you'll see why. So I'm actually going to be substituting this with at least in part with a short video. But anyways, let's just to sort of continue. So hey, let's take something that everybody can agree upon, right? So what do you typically call this type of drink? A carbonated beverage. And typically when I ask the students in a room, if I say if your friend in your dorm or in your flat is saying, hey, can you please fetch me a in air quotes carbonated beverage, what are they actually likely to ask you? They're going to say, what is the word that they're going to be using in the place of carbonated beverage? And now I'm going to switch over to a video from Condé Nast. Oops, nope, not this one. I actually want this one. Here we go. So here's again 50 people from 50 states talking from this is from Condé Nast, looking at culturally speaking.
We call a fizzy soft drink soda.
I would call a fizzy soft drink soda.
In Virginia, we call it soda.
Soda. There's no pop. It's just soda.
People in New Hampshire call a bubbly soft drink a soda.
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 A soda pop or pop?
It is called pop. Nothing else, nothing more. It is pop.
Definitely soda, not pops. Pops is no. That's my grandfather. Pops.
People in Oregon call a fizzy soft drink pop.
Pop. It's a pop with an op.
A pop. Yeah, we call a fizzy soft drink a pop.
I know some people say like pop, but that's my old man. Like a soda. I think it's soda.
In Florida, we call soda.
Soda. People in Utah call it a soda.
Soda.
Soda is a common word to be used now.
So a fizzy soft drink would be a soda pop or soda.
Soda pop. Pop.
In Indiana, we call a fizzy soft drink soda pop.
I think everywhere else in the state, except for Milwaukee, calls it pop. Milwaukee, this tiny, tiny little corner of the southeast part of Wisconsin, calls it soda.
Most people in Maine call a bubbly soft drink pop.
Pop.
Pop?
A pop.
Where I'm from, PG County, we call them pops.
Coke. Everything is Coke. It's never considered pop. It's always Coke.
In Alabama, any fizzy soft drink is a Coke.
We call all soft drinks Coke, no matter what brand they are.
People in Arkansas call a fizzy soft drink a Coke.
It's a Coke.
All of it.
It doesn't matter what it is.
I'd call a fizzy soft drink a pop.
Pop. People from Mississippi call it a soda.
In South Carolina, we call it pop.
People in Louisiana call it a pop or a Coke.
When you go to a restaurant and they ask you what you want to drink, you say, what kind of Coke do you have? And then they say what kind they have, and then you order which kind you want.
There you go. Okay, so this is, and again, what I would normally be doing in the class is I'd be asking, what are the names that you would use, and I'll tell you that the one that most typically comes up is soda or pop, and there is a lovely website that's existed for some time called Pop versus Soda. And this essentially shows where people, tend to call a carbonated beverage either pop, soda, or Coke, which is, as you can see here, the third option. We are in some ways like close to the okay, so what you're seeing here in this particular map is that essentially the yellow-coded portions are pop, the blue-coded portions are soda, and the orange ones are where Coke is prevalent. And as you can see, like where Toronto is in this particular area, we're pretty much in we're clearly north of the border, but we do tend to adopt the type of carbonated beverage which is most closely associated with our neighbors to the direct south, which is pop. And when I ask the students in the class what is the most common term that they use for generic soft drink, sure enough, pop comes up the most. Then followed by soda, but almost nobody in the class refers to it as in the generic form as Coke, as opposed to the actual trademark term Coke. But as you can see here, there's different places where there are different names for what is essentially the same sort of thing. And actually within this list, they've also gone into some more of the regional ways of referring to things. And here are some of the other, I'm guessing like county-specific areas that where other names, these are not necessarily the most dominant names, but where other names come up. And as you can see here, again, it tends to be all over the place. We have frizz and phosphate and bubble water, lolly water, and I love this one. This is my favorite, tingle fizz fuzz. I would so love to find out where in the States I can go and say, I would like a tingle fizz fuzz, please, and be served some sort of soft drink. I think that would be way cool. Soft drink, sweet drink, tonic, a fizz, a sody, a Coca-Cola, a soda, a dopes. These are all synonymous terms. Now, these are specific to the States. There are certainly regional differences within Canada as well. So, for example, and this is from a website called the10and3.com, from an article looking at essentially this is how Canada talks. And again, in terms of how we refer to carbonated beverages, essentially within the whole of English-speaking Canada, it is referred to as pop. And then within Quebec, it is known primarily as soft drink. So as it says here, Manitoba is a bit of an outlier, with 21% of Manitobans primarily use the term soft drink, while 20% 20% use soda. And then in Quebec, 63% of Anglophones prefer soft drink, while over a quarter use soda. So again, even there are differences even within the regions that you see here. But there are some other terms that also come up, that come into play, that in terms of regional differences to how people within Canada refer to essentially the same types of things. For example, here is how we might refer to what is known as a convenience store or a corner store. So within Ontario and BC, certainly corner store is a more prevalent term, but within the Prairie provinces, convenience store is again more prominent. Oh, and sorry, what I should say is that convenience stores also, I mean, if you look at that red patch, right in the sort of GTA-ish area, I mean, that is again, pretty popular. So while much of Canada prefers convenience store, Cape Breton and a few other regions strongly prefer corner store, and Quebecers call it dépanneur. Again, because well, that's just how they're referred to when you're in Quebec. You go to the local dépanneur. How about something like this? Again, the difference is for what we would normally say sneakers or running shoes or runners. Yeah, so in the West it's primarily runners, which is the preferred choice, interestingly enough, in Ireland, which is I guess why they colored this green. In the East it's sneakers, which is common in the US, and in the Ontario and Quebec it's running shoes. Now this next one is I think my favorite. So most everyone in the world refers to a hooded sweatshirt as a hoodie, except for people in Saskatchewan. They really do call it a bunny hug. Yes. And I'd never actually heard this term before until I ran into this particular article, and this I have actually asked a couple of people from there if this is true, and they said yes. This is what we typically call a hoodie. It's known as a bunny hug. Fair enough. Now, why all of this matters? The reasons for why this matters is that if you are again selling a product online, which in this case might be a hoodie, well, you want to make sure that if there's someone from Saskatchewan who's trying to order a bunny hug, that in fact you come up with the results that essentially match the synonymous term. So here we are. We actually have several results. One from Hollister, and again, now this was taken a couple of years ago. This might have changed, but when I last did the check, sure enough, type in bunny hug at these clothing stores, Hollister and then United Sportswear, I think it is, and then Walmart. Again, they had no results for bunny hug. And now I want to show another short video. This is actually done by my colleague Tony Tang, and he did a search for this online as well. So he did a search for bunny hug. Let's have a look at his results. There's no sound with this. So he's going to the Amazon site, and Amazon.com. And what's he going to do? Well, he's going to type in bunny hug, one word. So note that this is the .com site. So this is the American site. And there are results for bunny hug. Basically, there is a music group out there called Bunny Hug. And they have a whole bunch of releases. Okay, well, clearly that's not working. How about going to gap.ca? All right. Type in bunny hug here. And yeah, search results for bunny hug. Nope, couldn't find a match for bunny hug. They also seem to have trouble with apostrophes apparently in their search results search result page. But now we go to amazon.ca, bunny hug, and sure enough, they've got it right. So they have the idea of the synonymous term, in this case for bunny hug, and bringing up all of the hoodies as a result. So this is a case of essentially, coming up with a synonymous term so that when somebody looks for something in a search result, it then gets reflected to what is then, in this case, I guess, a primary term, which in this case would be hoodie. So you still don't actually see bunny hug mentioned anywhere here. It simply comes up with hoodie in this particular case. Okay. So now a way to have I want to take a look at some of the ways and means that this is accomplished. So one of these is what known as a synonym ring. So basically, what are cinnamon rings? No. Oh, that would be nice. But no, synonym rings. As I say here, they connect a series. It's a connection of a series of words that are defined as equivalent for the purposes of retrieval. So you see an equivalent of the ring here, and this is again from the Polar Bear book. There, I'm hoping you're doing your readings. There's a nice section that really does cover all of this off very, very nicely and in depth. So in this case, we have essentially words which are wholly equivalent to each other. So now at the top of this, we have Cuisinart, but note that is not necessarily the preferred term. It is simply another term, along with food processor, blender, KitchenAid, and then KitchenAid as one word, KitchenAid as two, and then Cuisinart spelt with a Z incorrectly, because the correct spelling is in fact with an S. But a lot of people think that, well, with the quiz, might part is actually sounds a bit like a Z that's making that sound. So that's a natural thing to think that maybe in this case a misspelled word may in fact be an equivalent term to the to the real term, so to speak. Now, in this particular case, as I say, synonym rings, there's no one preferred term. What we saw in the example with the bunny hug on Amazon.ca is that clearly you type in bunny hug there, and it points to hoodies. So in that case, there is in fact a preferred term. But you can see that something like this can actually be quite useful in some circumstances. When, essentially when there is no single defining term, maybe there's a lot of related terms and you don't want to, potentially shut out any possibilities for people who are looking for a particular item. Note that in fact, some of these may not be in fact true synonyms, because, a Cuisinart is not necessarily, just a food processor or a blender in particular. There's a lot of other things that I believe Cuisinart makes that are not necessarily blenders or food processors, but in many people's mind, it has become I guess it has become the generic term. And again, the Cuisinart with a Z example does again highlight the fact that it's worth inserting some things, and again, you can pick this sort of thing up from things like weblogs. If you're finding that people are consistently looking for an item that is that they are misspelling, but in a consistent way, you might actually want to consider adding that to something like a synonym ring, so that people who are then looking for that are then pointed to the correct item. So, for example, I have here, and this is sort of going. This example itself it sort of dates itself, but back when the iPod Touch was still a thing. People would be typing in things like iTouch, and sure enough, you get what they were trying to look for. It'd be interesting to see what sort of results that brings back these days. I don't think that product is actually still being made anymore. Anyways, moving on. And then we have the idea of authority files, where you have a set of preferred terms or acceptable values. In this case, it does not include any variants or synonyms. This is the sort of thing where libraries and governments, like to define proper names for a set of entities within a given domain. And as we have here, a set for Canadian provinces and territories, there is an official two-letter abbreviation. The same, of course, goes for the states. So Ontario is ON, Prince Edward Island is PE, Quebec is QC. Nothing. It pretty much does make sense here. Certainly, when you get to the states, there are at least a few things which are not wholly intuitive, because there's a lot of states that sort of have a lot of the same letters in them, so it can be a little. But again, that's a reason for having an official version of these things, so that there is no mistaking when this is in the context of an address, that is that people know that from the context that this pertains to this particular state or to province. Then we have what's known as authority files, and this is similar to what we were looking at earlier in terms of. This is basically an application of it. So while something like a synonym ring might have some, perhaps misspelled versions of this. An authority file would basically, and much like what we saw with the bunny hug pointing to the hoodie example, somebody does a search in this case for Tylenol, and in fact what they actually come up with is in fact the actual name of the product. Now, that certainly is one way of being able to deal with things like spelling errors, which is, if you don't know the correct name for a product or how it's spelled, then this is again something you might want to think of in terms of how to build this into the search capabilities within and tweaking the results for that come up for the search engine results set in the website and in the website that you're working with. There's also what's known as classification schemes, and anybody in library science is going to be very familiar with these sorts of things. So, it's basically an arrangement of preferred terms. One example of being Dewey Decimal Classification in library science. And that's exactly what you see here. So, 000 Computers Information General Reference, 100 Philosophy and Psychology, 200 Religion, 300 Social Sciences, so on and so forth. And you know that if you're looking for a novel by a particular author, it's going to be in the 800 section. If you're looking for works by the great astronomers or things on physics and so forth, you're going to find it in the 500 section. So again, it's wholly arbitrary, but it is a way of being able to find information once you know what the classification is. Now, how this actually can be applied in the real world, well, here we have an example of, somebody types in desk, and the thing is that there's a whole bunch of different types of desks out there. So, okay, the analogy may not be, quite the same as for Dewey Decimal, but you want to be able to see that, when somebody types in a very generic term, that they are potentially given, not just the generic forms of the desk, but just, here's the range of things that we have available. And that's as nicely displayed on this particular Walmart page where we have, a computer desk, we have a Smart Basics small desk, we have another Basics desk, and then we have a work desk, and then a computer desk. So, several different types of desks, which are returned right off the bat. Note that in this case, it actually comes up with no less than 423 individual results. But again, the variety at the beginning sort of gives you a sense as to what is there, and then you can also then try to filter that if that's what you're interested in doing. Now, in terms of the controlled vocabulary, again, there's a lot of you can build a lot of structure into these types of arrangements. So here we are, we have in this case, and again, this is from the Polar Bear book, which does a really, really nice job of describing this in depth. Here we have a controlled vocabulary in which equivalence, hierarchical, and associated relationships are identified, and again, for the purposes of improved retrieval. There is, in fact, an intent in creating these types of relationships. So what we have at the top is the broader term, which could be, say, the generic version or generic name for something, which might be, just sort of the overarching term for something. And then we have a preferred term, which is directly below that. And so let's say, so preferred term, that could be something like, as I said, the hoodies example. And then the broader term above that might simply be clothing, or perhaps maybe slightly less generic autumn clothing or spring clothing, something like that, your warm weather clothing. And then what we have to either side of that, the equivalence relationship, variant term, one of these would of course be something like bunny hug. And then underneath that we have the more hierarchical relationships. So we have a narrower term which can then fall underneath that, and that would then be potentially like a much more refined version of the type of hoodie, like perhaps the size of the hood or whether it has strings, that sort of thing. And if there's a particular name that is given to that, then encapsulates that type of variant, then That's, that would be the narrower term for that. It still relates to the preferred term. And then we have the, associated relationship related terms. So things that are close, but may not be exactly the same sort of thing. So, for example, like I would imagine something like, say, a rain jacket that has a hood could also be construed as a type of hoodie. I mean, not, you not really, but somebody who might, not know what to call a rain jacket might end up in, with a hood on it, might end up going in that area. And then it's like, oh, okay, well, what I really want is not a rain version of this. I actually want something that's nice and warm and soft and so forth. And then they come back essentially to the idea of the hoodie. So there we go. So again, sort of explaining a bit more about this, the preferred term, also known as the accepted term, the acceptable value, subject heading, or descriptor. All relationships are defined with relationship to the preferred term. So essentially you're saying this is what anything else that we're talking about here is going to be pointing back to. Then we have the variant, which is also known as entry terms or non-preferred terms. Variant terms have been defined as equivalent to or loosely synonymous with the preferred term. So again, we're talking hoodie and then, bunny hug. Broader term. The broader term is the parent of the preferred term. It's one level higher in the hierarchy. So again, that would potentially be something that describes that category in general. So I'm saying spring or autumn clothing, for example. And then narrower term is a child of the preferred term. It's one level lower in the hierarchy. So a specific type of hoodie. I'm sorry, I should have researched the the names for specific types of hoodies. But let's pretend that there is a specific name for a type of hoodie underneath that. That would be a narrower term. Related term is connected to the preferred term through the associated relationship. The relationship is also articulated through the use of see also. So, for example, Tylenol, see also headache. So, so that's a point. Again, coming back to the hoodie idea is that, like if you're looking for some sort of head covering, that could also be a way to be able to point back to hoodies. Maybe they don't want a hat, they want the hood that is in fact built into the clothing. And then there's also the use. So, traditional thesauri often employ the following syntax as a tool for indexers and users. So, a variant term use preferred term. For example, Tylenol use Tylenol. So, the misspelled version points to the properly spelled version. See as in Tylenol, with an I, see Tylenol with a Y. We also get the use for. This indicates the reciprocal relationship of the preferred term to the variant terms. It's used to show the full list of variants on the preferred terms record. For example, Tylenol UF, in this case, use for Tylenol. Scope note. Scope note is essentially a specific type of definition of the preferred term used to deliberately restrict the meaning of that term in order to rule out ambiguity as much as possible. So again, it's a descriptor to the people who are essentially coming up with this. So there's somebody is not sure as to how this is supposed to work. It's like, oh, okay, I've read the note, I get what's going on. So in terms of how this could all work, here is the semantic relationships from a wine thesaurus in this case. So in this case we have at the top, at least on the left-hand side, wine, broader term, and then sparkling wine is the preferred term for that particular type of wine. That's the preferred term. And then we have two different types of variants that fall from that, or that are associated with that directly. One is bubbly, which is a direct variant term for sparkling wine, and champagne, which is also a variant term. Underneath that, the more specific type of sparkling wine would be Brut Champagne. And then things that then might be related to that, and note that this is essentially by activity or what you might include it in. We have weddings, which often have sparkling wine in it, and if you're on a website that caters, like what types of things are good to use at weddings, well, in terms of wine, well, sparkling wine is the what's normally served the most, I guess. And then things like mimosas, which on a nice summer day, very much like today, it's like, wow, that would be again, what do you put in a mimosa? Well, sparkling wine. There you go. and again, like another sort of a version from this, you can have the sparkling wine itself be the broader term, and that's what you see on the right hand side. And then from that you have, again, the narrower term, the Brut Champagne. And then, and then from that, again, that can be dry champagne. That's again, a variant term for Brut champagne in that particular case. And then underneath Brut champagne, we have, the narrower term, so a very specific type of Brut champagne, the Deutz 1993 Brut champagne. And then we have things which are, potentially related to it, extra dry champagne or demi-sec champagne. And so what this is essentially saying is that, something that can be a preferred term, as you see on the left-hand side, can in fact be a broader term for something that is much more specific. So again, these types of relationships are typically thought about. And while I'm not actually covering it here, I mean, this is in some ways very much akin to what's known as an ontology, where essentially you're describing the relationships between various items, and in that way, I'm certainly beginning to see more ontological constructions of things like how metadata is being used in particular ways to describe content, because it's in that way it's not just describing the thing, but also the relationship of one thing to another thing, and then when you build essentially a web of how things are related to another, then you can pull out some rather interesting information from that. But we're not going to worry about that in this particular case. We're just going to stick with Thesauri. Well, in fact, this is the last slide on this one, because next I want to have a look at is the idea of faceted classification. The idea behind this came from early 20th century Indian librarian and mathematician, and I may get this name so wrong, forgive me, S.R. Raghunathan, who first came up with the idea, and basically he showed how books could be classified with two totally different Dewey Decimal numbers. It would be the same book, but a book on warfare in India could easily be classed in the Dewey Decimal System under warfare, or under essentially the geography, or India, or potentially history. So he came up with the first faceted classification system for libraries, which classified books by all of the types of subjects it covered. So that if you were looking for, again, the book on warfare in India, it would give you several different options. It wouldn't be locked into one place. You wouldn't have to know beforehand that this book could only be found under warfare or in India or what have you. It could potentially be found in all of the places where you might potentially be interested in looking that sort of information up. In terms of how this works, so a hierarchy versus a faceted hierarchy. So in this case, we have a single hierarchy, sort of the Yahoo model on the left, and then we have the faceted on the right. So basically, rather than a one taxonomy fits all approach, we're basing the concept of multiple taxonomies that focus on different dimensions of the content. So that's really what's being put across here. And you can see how this sort of thing was, and I do want to sort of emphasize was, applied at wine.com. Now this is again pulled from the Polar Bear book. So here we have a screenshot taken from the Polar Bear book, looking at essentially wine.com, and you can see their extensive drop-down list when you click on wine, and you get varietals, you get top rated, trending now, great deals, price, region, fine wine, special designation, wine clubs, glasswares, and accessories. And the facet in this particular case here, you see sample controlled vocabulary values. In this case, we have red, which then has under that Merlot and Pinot Noir, white, which then can include Chablis and Chardonnay, sparkling, pink, and dessert. And then for region, which can then be associated with these other types of items, Australian, Californian, French, Italian, so on and so forth. And then winery, in terms of the actual manufacturer, comes from Blackstone or Clos de Bois or Cakebread or whichever other manufacturer, a vintner, where this comes from, the year that's then associated with these particular items. And again, you might be looking for something that is, like, let's say you're looking for a nice wine from, let's say from 2000. And it then links to all of the wines that were then made in that particular year, and that could then cover a whole wide range of items. The same then also goes for things like the price, like basically a price range, a specific price, or cheap, moderate, expensive, which can be arbitrarily set in terms of what they actually mean. But again, you get the sense that, if you have a faceted way of controlling the information in this particular way, that you can then go out and, really aid people in finding content that way. Now, having said that, note that what I say for the title here is how this, how it was applied at wine.com. What I found is that they have since, if you take a look at wine.com today, in fact, I recommend you doing that. You give that a try. Is that they seem to have dispensed with that a type of approach, instead focusing essentially focusing more on search and essentially pulling up the types of results that people are looking for. So it's gone from being less of a sort of a navigation intensive way of looking for things, and much more of what is it you're looking for, and then we'll try to pull those results back. So I since they seem to have abandoned this concept, at least in this particular format, and have now moved to starting with varietal instead of something very, very broad such as wine. Now, having said that, again, facets when applied to mobile displays. Again, that's another thing that is, can be sort of problematic. So this is, it then becomes, well, how do you actually make this work within such a small form factor, essentially, because things like this was, the wine.com example is good because it is clearly designed for something on a large screen. I mean, again, look at this again. This type of drop-down menu that you get here is great if you're looking at this from a desktop computer. But boy, that would definitely not work at all when you come down to the smaller form factor of a mobile website, or mobile responsive website is what I'm trying to say. So in this case, it's worth to know that the design concept that's really come up to help with this is what's known as a tray overlay, to display facet controls, and here you see examples as used on Amazon and on eBay. So basically, this is a new approach to providing faceted search for mobile users, showing the facet controls as a type of push-out style tray on top of the search results. This type of design allows for the continuous visibility of a result. So even while the facet controls are open, some information about the results is visible in the background. The Amazon iPhone application and eBay's mobile website both now use an overlay to display facet controls on the same screen as the search results. And in usability testing, essentially people really do immediately get how to use the faceted search screens, which tend to include many different elements and controls. So as long as the controls are displayed properly, most people jump right into creating and refining their queries. Instant results are an important result of the process because they allow users to see right away if they've applied the wrong filter or applied overly narrow criteria that eliminates too many options. And again, that's from a research that the Nielsen Norman group made. So again, it's important to keep in mind the delivery platform that you're designing these things for, and this particular way of applying facets of mobile displays, it has really worked. And that is basically all I really want to talk about for this week. In terms of the first half of the class, the next portion will delve extensively into this subject of accessibility and websites. Lots of good, interesting information there. I hope you'll be there for that. And then the week after that, of course, is going to be studio session number 4, which is going to be using Optimal Workshop's TreeJack, so another one of their tools on your target website. And that is another way for trying to understand whether the hierarchical information, and not just the labels, but whether or not the hierarchies actually make sense. So this is a way of testing whether that actually works. And also, look for an announcement containing more information on how to best set things up for using TreeJack on your target website. I do have some material on that. Again, I want to make sure that that is presented in the best fashion. I'll almost certainly be making another short video essentially outlining what needs to be done. And that's pretty much it for me today. Hey, did manage to do that in under an hour. Woo! All right, folks. And if you're watching this on the weekend, enjoy your weekend, and I will see you all on Tuesday evening for the second half of this class. Okay, take care, folks. Bye.